Hello, it's Amy. I'm here back again finally with Beyond the Pyrenees by Marcel Aurousseau. And this is the sequel, you could call it a sequel, call it Volume 2 or the second half of Highway into Spain, which was a travel memoir published in 1930 initially in one volume in the United Kingdom and then in two separate volumes in 1931 in the United States. And I've just finished reading the US edition in two volumes. And so this is the beautiful original 1931 edition with the almost perfectly intact dust jacket from that year. And I of course took the dust jacket off to read so as not to damage it. But it was quite a find when I found it, and I have to say I immensely enjoyed the entire reading experience of both volumes. Now, as I was reading, I was reminded of something that I read as a child. Now, of course, two very different works. One is a children's book, one is more of a non-fiction memoir for adults. But one of my favorite books as a child was a little work by Walter R. Brooks titled Freddy Goes to Florida. It was also published under the title, I think, There and Back Again. But it was the first book that began a series of children's chapter books about farm animals. And what captured my imagination about Freddy Goes to Florida back in the day is partially what captured my imagination with Highway into Spain and Beyond the Pyrenees, here as an adult in 2022. Both are travel books. Freddy Goes to Florida is about a group of farm animals: Freddy the pig, Charles the rooster, Alice and Emma the ducks, and a few other animals, including cows, spiders, a cat, who decide they're sick of the northern American winters and they would like to spend the winter, somewhere relaxing and warm. And so they decide to migrate like the birds, and they set off one day for Florida. And it's this kind of, soothing and lulling, and I don't know how to describe it. It's just an immensely pleasurable read about, these mundane, everyday things that happen on a walking journey. The people you meet, the little adventures you have, some of the things are less mundane in Freddy Goes to Florida. But I got that same feeling that I got reading that book many times as a child, reading Beyond the Pyrenees, which, it's interesting because they were published around the same time. Freddy Goes to Florida was published in 1927 in the United States. Highway into Spain and Beyond the Pyrenees were published just a couple years after, 1930, 1931, in the United Kingdom initially. And so, in some ways it's that same style of writing, perhaps a similar worldview. But it's just so interesting, as an adult to make a connection to one of those original beloved childhood texts, and to realize that, some of the things I love in literature and books are things that I picked up on and learned to love as a child. Now, of course, Beyond the Pyrenees is much more philosophical than a children's book about a pig migrating, of course. But some of the same elements are there. Those, everyday experiences in the trip, the appreciation of the landscape, the unexpected, meals and food, the people you meet. And I think Marcel Aurousseau wants us to appreciate those mundane, everyday things. In fact, his whole philosophy seems to be about embracing the experiences of life rather than just sitting around and waiting for things to come to you. You set off on this journey, and it really is about the journey rather than the destination, to sound cliche here. And there's a passage near the end. It's subtly hinted at throughout the two volumes, but there's a passage near the end that kind of cements it for me, this world view and this view of what this journey meant to him. And I'm going to find the passage. I'm just looking for the page number in my notes here. I think we're looking at, well, let's look at 401 and 402, and then we'll take a look at 239, which was the initial passage I was thinking of. Because 401 is immediately as they catch sight of the outskirts of Madrid, because the intention of their journey was to walk on foot from Paris, France to Madrid, Spain. At the beginning of volume 1, they are in Paris. They decide that they're going to make this journey on foot, you know, just for the hell of it. There's not really any purpose. They're sitting in a cafe, and one says to the other one day, you know, what should we do? And the other says, well, how about we walk to Spain? And so they make the plans, and that's what they do. And by the end of volume 1, they've made it all the way through France. They've reached the Spanish border. They've essentially crossed over, and beyond the Pyrenees, that's the mountains, beyond these mountains is volume 2. And by the end of volume 2, they have made it to Madrid. And it's a little bit abrupt, almost disappointing. I sort of expected to get, you know, a chapter or two, maybe a dozen pages about what it was like to be in Madrid, how they felt when they got there, what they did, a little bit of, you know, color and information about Madrid. But we're not given any of that, because as Aurousseau reminds us here, it wasn't really about point A or point B. It wasn't about Paris or Madrid. It was about that walk in between. And they're almost sad to see the journey ending. So here we are. Let's find ourselves. Oh, and I've got a, oops, there's my dust jacket. It's coming off here. We've got these beautiful end papers in here. I'll just show you these end papers as soon as I get this dust jacket situated again. These beautiful end papers. But here we are on page 401, and they are catching sight of Madrid. Madrid, the mass of a splendid city mantling the ground, so near, rising over there to the west and in front of us. All we could say was how new, how American, how quickly it must be growing. The sight revealed no beauty of Madrid. Blocks of big apartment houses advancing uphill in the extensions of a prosperous, wealthy suburb. But we saw not that. We saw a goal attained, and saw too the swift vision of its attainment. Weeks of traversing the land, weeks passing in the eternal freshness of the world, weeks of a fine purity of association, weeks of a life that we could never live again, for yonder lay Madrid. There was not any doubt about it, that it was over. We had set out to walk from Paris to Madrid, had carried out our plan almost exactly, and neither Paris nor Madrid had ever held for us a greater meaning than the ends, the limits of our journey's 1,000 miles. A new, a different adventure opened now, discovery of the city seemed tamed yet not revealed, but soon and slowly to be known. And so it's really the end of the journey. He's leaving us just on the outskirts of Madrid, letting us know there's more adventures to come, but those adventures are not the purpose of this book. Rather, it was about that walk. And I want to go back to another passage here. I think we're looking for, and I think I wrote that page number down wrong. But let's look at 239, because 239 had an interesting passage about a dandelion. And it's this kind of almost surreal experience where the narration shifts a bit, and we're getting this third person narration where they've stopped for a rest on the side of a road in a field somewhere, and they're watching this dandelion, and there's this story about a bottle of ink a bottle of ink that seems to shift as it's sitting on a dandelion. They're saying the dandelion that was bumping. And they're trying to uncover the mystery of this dandelion. Why is it bumping? They shift the bottle of ink. It doesn't bump on any other dandelion. It does on this dandelion. They examine its root. Can't figure out what the heck is going on. But it leads to this introspective moment about what a good story is. And they're acknowledging that this story about the dandelion is leaving us as the reader unsatisfied. It left them unsatisfied. And there's this parallel between, leaving a story unsatisfactory and the unsatisfactoriness that we get in life in general. And so they've pulled up this dandelion. They're pulling up all these dandelions in a field to compare the roots. Can't see anything different between them, wondering what has bewitched this bottle of ink. And then he says, it is not a good story, because a good story is supposed to have a strong plot, a satisfactory development, and a satisfying denouement, as they call it. A good story is one that gets you all puzzled and then lets you into the secret by surprise near the end. This one only gets you puzzled. The people who like good stories are people who think that everything has a simple explanation. But if you look closely at life and listen to true stories, you soon discover that very few things in the world have a simple explanation or any real explanation at all. Life is mysterious, and that is what makes it always wonderful, even when it is unhappy or even sorrowful. But most people are a little frightened of the mystery, and instead of going out and living, they settle into safe corners after work and enjoy nothing but the safe, make-believe adventures that they find in good stories. And as long as people are like that, they will prefer good stories to true stories, and will refuse to believe in wonders and mysteries that can't be explained. This story is perfectly true. True as the other fantastic little stories I have told in this book. And if you know anything about symbols, you will understand them all and feel that they are true. If, on the other hand, you are a literal person and do not believe in symbols, but instead believe that human thought and life and action will all someday be explained by a succession of chemical reactions in the brain and body, you will then declare that they are nonsense, and I will say Tommy rot. You're a vain, simple, ignorant person, lacking in intellectual courage. For nobody misses and actually avoids so much of the real world as the professed realist. He believes that realism and materialism are the same thing. Of course, you will tell me that I have said all this merely because I cannot write good stories. I cannot write them, and it is because I cannot make believe that life consists of nicely arranged complications that can all be disentangled and simply explained. Life is too big and intricate and fine and subtle a web for that. Nothing can possibly be invented that is more interesting than life itself. Inexplicable, common life, more wonderful, more diverting, more full of adventure than any make-believe. The best things that go into books are extracted from life by observation and understanding, and are not invented. There can be enough in 1 hour of life to fill books, and fill them splendidly, provided that you don't insist upon having explanations. And I think he's taking a moment to explain, in some ways, the book to us. Because there really is, there's not, a plot in the traditional sense of a beginning, a middle, and an end, or character development. Rather, it's episodes. It's this meandering narrative, which really is a slice of life. And it can be unbelievable to think that he would remember, each of these moments, each of these days, each of these conversations, unless he was keeping, an intricate, detailed journal. But I think the point is that even if, some details are omitted, some locations are, twisted a bit in memory, it's all about the memory, all about these experiences, and about, acknowledging that the purpose of his life is going out and living and having these experiences, and he doesn't want to sit in one place, and he seems to think that other people certainly shouldn't as well. And I did enjoy it, although, here I am sitting in one place. I am that person who dips into books at the end of the workday, rather than going out and walking to the nearest major city. But I think it's very interesting that he did and that he decided to write a book about it. And, I enjoyed the whole thing, and it's certainly something that I would recommend to anyone who likes travel memoirs, who likes this idea of exploring what it means to have experiences and, this day-to-day observation, this observation of the shifts in culture as you go. And at some points, it's not clear what exactly is happening, because it seems, the further they get into Spain, the easier a time they have traveling. They're viewed with less suspicion than they were on the edges near the border of France. They get better accommodations than they did when they first entered Spain. There's some moments where they're literally locked in barns for the night, where they have to share, a bed, and they feel as though there's insects crawling on them. And it's not clear whether, there's a shift in the culture of the people they're actually meeting, or people are more used to tourists or are more welcoming, or whether it's they themselves who have been changed in some way by this journey and have been, able to shift their own perspectives of how they're approaching these villages and these towns and these cities, and how they're searching for places to stay for the night and to eat and that sort of thing. And of course, it's just absolutely littered throughout with scenes of, restaurants and cafes and observation and resting in fields. And it just sounds like, despite the exhaustion of walking that far, it does sound like a perfect, relaxing vacation. And it certainly was for them, because when they reach Madrid, they almost can't believe it's over. They don't want to stop walking. They want to continue. And I think that sentiment is shown, in that last little bit of the passage I read, where they said there would be more adventures and more things and walking to experience, within Madrid itself. And I really wish there was a third volume specifically about their experiences in Madrid, because I certainly would love to know Marcel Aurousseau's experiences there. One other interesting thing that comes up is some of his observations on art. We get a short passage near the end where he's talking about art and the masses and this modern culture. He references Henry Ford, and he doesn't seem to believe that this, American materialism, mass production, Henry Ford kind of culture is really that culture that is best for everyone. Is the culture that is going to, help people realize things. Because he definitely ties art, the art of the era, with education, and his definition of education is not this absorption of facts. Education rather seems to be tied to, this thought process, this ability of thought process, and this understanding of what is happening in life and what is life. And he believes that, writing in the late 20s, publishing in 1930, 1931, that Western culture is stuck in this era where the masses, the majority of people, don't really understand the art of the day. And he says that, it could be a few centuries before art connects with the majority of people again, as it has in the past. He seems to believe there was kind of this almost golden age. He doesn't tell us exactly what the era was. He seems to believe there was almost this golden age where people understood and valued art. And he doesn't believe that people are doing it now, although he has a little bit of comment on the buildings going up in the United States, and seems to believe that it's not quite architecture, it could be art. And it's hard to say exactly where he sees himself in this dialogue about art. Certainly, I think he's trying to strive for a way for ordinary people to understand art, and perhaps that's what he's doing here by taking us through something that's very accessible to everybody. Going for a walk, observing things. but the connection isn't quite made there. And I think that's okay, because as he says in his story about the dandelion and the ink pot, it's not about explaining things or providing an explanation. Rather, it's about providing kind of these nuggets as food for thought, which he does very well in sprinkling throughout in these seemingly, mundane yet beautiful passages about landscape and about the interesting people they meet. But yes, I think I will leave it at that. I am extremely glad that I came across this 2-volume set, as I mentioned in my last video about Highway into Spain. I was reading another book, one from the 1950s, where the author was talking about some of his favorite books, and this one in particular came up. And as I said in the previous video, it has been out of print since its initial publication in the 1930s. So it was a little bit hard to obtain, but if you're interested, there still are a few copies floating out there on the internet available to purchase. So I will see you all again soon, and I hope you're enjoying your Saturday night.